Welcome to the Good Divorce Show, where we can help you learn how to navigate the journey of divorce with less conflict, less debt, and equip you not to just get divorced, but also learn how to be divorced. Your host, certified divorce coach Karen McNenny, shares her wealth of knowledge, gets advice from other relationship experts, and interviews couples who learn how to have a good divorce, so you can too. Now here's your host, Karen.
Hello, listeners. I'm Karen McNenny, your good divorce coach. And today, coming from Northeast Florida, we are chatting with Heather B. Quick. She is the founder and CEO at Florida Women's Law Group. She graduated from Stetson University College of Law with honors, and she began her career as an assistant state attorney in the 13th Circuit of Florida. But before opening her own practice, she worked with her uncle's family in a criminal law practice and for a statewide firm practicing medical malpractice litigation. But in 2006, Heather opened her own firm. She is a current member of the Florida Bar Association, the Jacksonville Bar Association, and Jacksonville Women Lawyers Association. Her professional and community involvement extends beyond her passion for helping women in the legal space. She is also a certified yoga instructor, which I think that every divorce lawyer and divorce professional should come with that kind of self-care. She is really committed to helping women guide them through their divorce, finding out, is it right for you? She has written several books. The fifth one is in progress, and currently on the shelf, you can find Women's Guide to Divorce in Florida. Is divorce right for you? And Women's Guide to Becoming a Successful Entrepreneur. She is joining us today from Northeast Florida, where she lives with her husband, 3 kiddos, and 4 dogs. The dogs are almost outnumbering the humans. Welcome to the show, Heather. Nice to have you here on the Good Divorce Show.
Thank you, Karen, so much for having me today.
I know I get the question, and perhaps you do as well. Why would anyone want to spend their time working with folks going through divorce? It just sounds so stressful and depressing. What brought you to the work? What keeps you in the work?
So I would never have considered it as a law student or frankly, with my first job from law school as a prosecutor. I loved criminal law. I still do. I find it fascinating, but really only on the prosecuting side. And I loved being in the courtroom. And, as I transitioned from the state attorney's office, my uncle had a practice for many years. I worked for him, and this was several years ago, but he did a lot of everything, in the beaches area where we live. And I learned family law from him and some criminal defense, and really realized that criminal defense was not for me. I'm a prosecutor at heart. And also learned at that time how much I could really help people going through a divorce, because the legal system is, meant for lawyers, not for lay folks to maneuver. And you can really make a difference in someone's life and really help them through the process and achieve things that they can't do on their own. And that really was what led me to that area. And the more I practiced and the more I realized that I was very good at this. And frankly, probably due to my parents, they've both been married multiple times to different people and divorced. So I had like a front row seat to a lot of marriages and divorces throughout my life. So I completely understood like where they were coming from. The various men my mother had been married to that were, in the past horrible. The same with the women, or at least, one that my dad was married to was horrible. And so I really had that option, I saw all that. And so when, I was counseling people, I just was like, yeah, I'm really good at this. Like I've lived pretty much everybody's story, it seems, on one way or another. And I'm good in court. I had great trial skills, so that allowed me to really advocate for clients. And And then, I further developed, a realization that I really loved helping women, and that, again, I was really good at it. They were repeating the same patterns over and over, and I could really make a difference for women going through divorce if I created a practice that really catered to them and the road they go through when they're divorcing. So that was how it was.
Yes, and you have built a beautiful practice, Women Winning Divorce. I'm going to dig back a little bit in time, Heather, as a child of divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And the retrospect of your experience. And as you've already highlighted, it wasn't all rosy. There was challenges and things that you wish that maybe your parents had done differently.
Mm-hmm.
Curious from your own experience of a child of divorce, what you pass on, what kind of advice or wisdom you invoke to your clients of some of those do's or don'ts or things to think about, or you might not be considering how this might impact your child. Are there some things that you've brought from your personal experience into the guidance you provide your clients?
Yes, I think that one of the things is but this I don't know how much I really get into with my clients, right? Because this is the post-divorce stuff. It is the new relationships, and that I think that is, people are not aware of the impacts that have on children as much. And I don't think it's necessarily a positive thing just because you've, found love again to, rush off and get married and create a whole new family. I think that is difficult. And I think probably the majority of what I experienced or I, perceived as conflict between my parents had to do with my father's new wife, and I will say abdicating his responsibility to communicate to his new wife. I do see that a lot. And so it's not that I'm advising him, I'm empathizing with the clients and recognizing that that is not right to do that on their part, and how to help them come up with some boundaries and more safeguards to keep that from happening.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I think also reminding those of you that are entering into your post-divorce life, sometimes we want to dive into those new relationships while we're going through the divorce. And I would say, even if you found someone special, tap the brakes, keep it on the down low. It can just be such a place of hurt, and it can do harm in the process. And I always think anyone going through divorce should have a warning sign on their forehead anyway that says, "Don't date me yet."
Right. Yeah. Take a minute to figure yourself out.
Get through to the other side. And when you do start dating, to remind all of us, because it can be really exciting that there's a new love and a new relationship and a new beginning, especially if you've come from just a really apathetic, underwhelming, or even damaging marriage. We're ready to get on with it. It takes time. And I recommend space for yourself to re-identify who you are, who you want to be in your new relationship, and that you don't even bring that person into the children's life until that relationship has been established at least 6 months, so that we don't get the swinging door, people coming and going, kids attaching, putting their hearts. Maybe you're re-partnering with someone who also has kids, and those kids start to bond, and then the relationship's gone, and then there's a rinse and repeat and a rinse and repeat. So beautiful to know that new love can come, but there are intentional ways to do it, and there are ways that can really be harmful long-term to your kiddos. I was really struck as you were chatting, Heather, about this interesting path that you've had as a lawyer, in different areas, and just how you as a professional have transformed and continued to grow this beautiful firm. And I'm wondering, as you are walking the journey with your clients, how these women transform over the course of their divorce journey with you, where they begin, where they could end, and some of the landmines and the landmarks along the way.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a lot for sure. And it's so wonderful to see women, they come to our office and they're in a very, difficult place, probably the most difficult place they've yet experienced. And so many emotions they're going through. And one of the things that always struck me is that they just don't value all that they brought to that relationship. And I'm for, our firm represents only women. I am very for women, pro mom, wife, an ex-wife. And I, have said many times to my clients in the past, right? I can't make him a better person or father, but we can fight to get you as much money as we can. And right, because that's what the court allows. You advocate for that. And also it's educating them on the law, so they have realistic expectations. They understand where the law is on, shared custody. And it's changed so many years in my 24 years of practice. And it's not all women are prepared for that. And so, there's a huge adjustment. There's a lot of fear. There's at times they, feel victimized, but then act like victims. And, we're trying to help them not play that role, because that's a choice. And that's how you understand the process. You educate yourself, and you really look at what are the finances, because it doesn't matter, whatever the income is when you're married, whether it's both you working or just one, for a while, it's probably going to stay the same, but yet now 2 households. And so to come in with this expectation based on most people's experience, which is just, TVs and movies about divorce, and I don't mean that in any negative way. It's just, it's what it is, right? That's your expectation. And it's like, no, he should keep me, in the standard of living that I've become accustomed to. Fair. And I don't disagree, right? But I don't write the laws, nor do I, preside over any of the cases. And it's usually impossible, right? Because the money is where it is. And that's sometimes a hard pill to swallow, but then it's like, but you're one more than just that. And what can you do, right? To help yourself, in addition to where, whatever the law provides for you. And, that is something that the more and more, the longer I've practiced and watched women, and I have my own daughters, and, I think y'all need to be prepared to take care of yourself. And you should never expect anybody else to take care of you in a financial way. Right? Like, you are a strong, very smart human being. You should be able to be responsible for yourself. And that doesn't mean not to get married and share in things, but, just be careful. It's a slippery slope. And women still today, young women still think that's the dream. And it ends up being a nightmare for most of the women I see. And so you give up your power in a relationship. You give up that equal footing when you can't provide for yourself. So anyway, it's changed over the years, right? And I'm still advocate, make him pay as much as we can. And I just do, that's my job in court, right? And our team. And the laws have changed since I started practicing. So it's not, as favorable in certain cases for alimony as it used to be. But that's all right. We can still help you understand what you're entitled to, right? Like, that's a big thing. And, so many women are like, well, he said that's his retirement. And I'm like, well, you've been it's yours too. I was like, that's not even an argument. It's just 50-50. Like, that's just a given. It's just a given. And helping them understand, like, no, what you brought to the table has value. Now, how much of that is going to help you, sustain yourself over the long term, we have to figure out. But it's really amazing when you see this like light go off in their eyes, and then they're like, I'm going to be okay. And I'm like, you're going to be okay. Yeah. There are a lot of other cases where it's going to be tough financially, but it's going to be worth it. And they know it. And that's why they're in this office, right? Because they know they need to be the person who they can be divorced for themselves, their children, everything. And it's worth it if they have to work a couple jobs and figure it all out. But, and when you see that, like that realization that I can do this, and they have confidence, it's really an amazing thing for me to see, because then it's like, yeah, you're going to be fine. You don't need a man. You should want a man, and you don't need him.
Well, this message of personal empowerment, I think, is so important, particularly as we re-single in our lives in that reinvention. But I want to dig a little deeper in this financial end of things. And what happens? What is your approach when there is a sense that money is being hidden or being spent, or something over the course of the marriage or as the divorce is coming along? You refer to this as financial infidelity. And I would like you to unpack a little bit more of what you mean by that, and what wives and soon to be ex-wives should be watching for. What are the red flags?
So the red flags are like a change, because usually this isn't, most of the time, this hasn't been happening throughout the whole marriage. Now, sometimes it can, and you just really, are unaware, and maybe intentionally unaware. So I think that's the first thing for all women. Obviously, if you're single, you have to know what comes in and what goes out. And if you're married, you should really know, and not putting your head in the sand and just spending without really understanding. You have a right to know, and you have a right to be a part of that conversation. And what I've heard from women is, we used to always do this like trip or this vacation, and now he's like, we don't have money. And you're like, why don't we have money? Right? Like, you've been working, and maybe they've even been working, but they're just not as involved in the finances. And it can be, sometimes it is a gambling problem, or they've got a huge spending issue. And I will say, I think the wives are just not digging enough, because that's an uncomfortable conversation, or, we don't talk about those things, but you need to, because, or if, say, your husband has a business, or, and so then he's had to, take loans out for the business, but that's going to affect your home, or he's not been paying taxes, and now there's a lien, and in a lot of things. And, I will say that I'm not always saying this is like some evil intent, right? I think, two parties, you guys do the dance together, and you maybe don't want to know, and you want him to be your knight in shining armor and handle it all, and he might not be able to, but yet he's afraid to tell you. And I'm not saying either of these behaviors are healthy, whatever, marriage and relationships complicated, but I think that is so important that you have the conversation, because it could be, he could be having, sending money somewhere, trying to hide it. He could be having an affair. He could be gambling. He could have a drug addiction, things that just take a lot of money and it doesn't return. And that can be, it's as devastating as sexual infidelity. Because say they, mortgage the house up, you've got like 2 or 3 mortgages, and you really are like, I didn't know. And they're like, how did these things get signed? And, you don't know, but all of a sudden the life you thought like financially you had, you didn't. And then of course that affects everything else in the marriage, because that's such a trust issue, and it's devastating. I don't, doubt that for a second. It's really hard, and a big reason marriages break up, financial reasons. And I think that begins with the inability to communicate about money, and we all take roles, right? There's a lot of roles. There's a lot of jobs in a household. As you and I talked when you were on my show, everybody's got a job. There's tons of them. We divvy them up, and that's okay. And that's normal. However, you really need to have discussions about where are we financially? And especially, many times women who, and this is just in my experience, so it'll sound like I'm generalizing, but they're not working. And so they put less value on their time, which that's not true, but maybe they do. And they think, well, I ought not question him because he's the one working. And so I just need to be really good at what I'm doing and not have that conversation. And that is parts of what, I think destroy marriages, because it goes on so long. And there's resentment on both sides. And, if financial difficulties, we haven't been through that to the extent that we were when I first started in private practice back in like 2008, 2009. And those were difficult times. People were like, we can't even sell the house because we're going to owe all this money. And, there was nothing to divide. It wasn't a conversation where you're going to be fine. It's like, you guys, I don't know how this is going to work. Y'all might need to keep it together for a while because you can't afford to even live separately. And your house is upside down. So, and I think it starts with communication, but it can get so bad. And, some things are hidden, and sometimes it is a bad intent because it could be an addiction. And so of course they're manipulating it and not telling the truth, but you're believing them. And in my experience, most women and most of us, in hindsight, if you look back, you're like, oh yeah, I maybe should ask that one or two more questions. Like I maybe should have dug in, but I was exhausted. Like we're both dealing with this stuff and I just didn't. So it's not to blame anything, but it happens a lot.
Yes. And I want to have you clarify innocent spousal boundaries. So let's say that your spouse keeps saying that they've been paying taxes and it's all taken care of, but then you come up against divorce and you're like, we have 3 years of unpaid taxes. I had no idea. Or I had no idea there was this debt. Or we had a credit card that was in both our names and he removed his name and I'm going to be stuck with that. How my credit report. So, and you're in practicing in Florida, so it might be specific, but it's my understanding that there is a caveat around innocent spousal circumstances where you really were left in the dark and you may not necessarily have to reap the same punishment, if that's the way. You're going to do a better job of explaining this.
So that is a phrase that, you can use usually like with the IRS, and that has to do specifically with taxes. And I'm not a tax attorney. And as one of my guests recently said, they were tax aware, right? She's a family law attorney. And so I really like that statement. And the problem becomes if it's a joint tax return and, that money is, say, jointly owed, you will probably have to seek that remedy through a tax lawyer if you're able. And I'm not aware, but sometimes the IRS does lien property. And so then, of course, you'd have to find out, hey, am I immune from that? Now, with credit card debt, not so much. It's marital, and it's going to be divided. And typically, a lot of marriages are, a spender and a saver. And when it's the extreme, obviously that is a huge blow because all the money that's been saved potentially is marital, and all the money in debt is marital. And that's usually the way that's going to go down. And that's why those conversations are so important, because if the debt was incurred during the marriage, even if you didn't know about it, it's going to be marital. Only if maybe we can show some, that it was illegal, criminal. But at the end of the day, like the credit cards. And now, if your name is not on the card, it's still marital. And if your name's on it and his isn't, it's still marital for him. But for purposes of the creditor, they're going after whoever's name is on it. Yeah. And so it gets a little complicated, and you can get some relief in family court. But again, it's, it's eye-opening and can be very, very disturbing for individuals when they're entering a divorce and they really were unaware, and they, were, that maybe your spouse has a credit card, has a PO box, or, everything's online. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like in, the old days where you got a lot of mail and you could see the statements. Like, you don't. And
it's invisible.
It really is. And so that's, even if you're having conversations, if they really want to hide it, if anybody really wants to hide something from you, they can, right? Mm-hmm. It's only if you're, really choosing not to pay attention on the other stuff. But, that can happen, and it's extremely aggravating is like the least probably adjective. People really get very upset, and they cannot believe that now we're divorcing and you have all this debt. Oh. And I'm going to be on the hook for it. And the answer is most of the time, yes.
Yes, yes. As I hear you talk, I'm reminded, you said, like, I'm not a tax lawyer, and there might be repair to credit. That it can take a team to move a family through divorce. Right? Yeah. There's a lawyer, but maybe there's a financial advisor or a CDFA, a certified divorce financial advisor. There might be a co-parenting specialist or a coach like myself. I'm curious, within your practice, when you think about the legal team, like, what are the resources and experts that we might need to lean on through the divorce experience?
Well, yes, we have several partners that we team with, and absolutely a financial planner, very important. And sometimes in the middle of the divorce, but certainly for afterwards to help you understand the assets. Mm-hmm. And always a CPA, just to understand the tax effects of certain properties you may have, mm-hmm. certain accounts, and really understanding that. And also, hey, are we going into this with the tax credit? Maybe some people roll over refunds year after year, and you have no idea, and you're like, yeah, there's $50,000 in tax credits, you ought to get some of that, right? If you don't have anybody looking at that, you wouldn't know. Likewise, if there's debts to be paid. And also there's that other level of accounting, the forensic accounting, that is really important in if someone has their own business or it's a complicated alimony case and high asset, that may be necessary. We always recommend and want our clients involved in therapy and or coaching. They're very different, and I think they both add a lot for our clients. And also, if they're minor children, really think it's helpful for them to have therapy as well. And, sometimes we need a real estate lawyer to understand other stuff going on with their properties. So yes, we really make sure we have all of those types of experts when necessary, ready to help, because, you may understand it, but the court, is not going to take you as an expert on certain things. And we may understand it as the attorneys, but we don't testify. And you really also want the opinion of somebody that has that expertise to guide you, so that when we go to mediation, you understand if that is a fair and good settlement for you and the implications of that. So the team is so important. And, does everybody need all that? No, but some people do. And sometimes it's just, we need a parenting coordinator. That's something we have, very often, that I would say probably is similar to what you do for individuals, but usually this is either agreed upon or court ordered. And it can be extremely helpful, and they just need help because they've never communicated or navigated that very well, hence the divorce. And now they're like, okay, how do we do it now? So it's something that definitely we use very often.
Yeah. So good reminder, listeners, that there will likely be a team of experts, and not to be shy about being really transparent about what you don't understand, where you need help, clarification, and to call in the cavalry as needed. I'm going to take us in a totally different direction for a moment, Heather, and something that we don't often get to talk about here on the Good Divorce Show, which is when there's been substance abuse, addictions, in particular, things that could create an exposure of harm to the children. So for instance, I had a client, I tend to have a number of clients whose spouses are alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
And now suddenly they are going to have shared custody. Their fear is, will my former spouse drive drunk with the kids? Will they be home alone? Are they going to pass out on the couch? Are they going to oversleep and not get, a whole variety of concerns when it comes to the abuse of some kind of substance.
Mm-hmm.
And they're always like, what can I do, Karen? What are the parameters? How do I protect my kids from their other parent, who I actually think might be in danger? But how do we prove it? How do we make a case? And how do we ultimately help, maybe that parent get sober so that they can be a more effective, proper parent? So big category of substance abuse and fear of safety for kids. How can we help those moms?
Well, some of the first realizations is that you can't control, your spouse and what they do, but you can ask the court for help. If we can show this is a problem,
Mm-hmm.
and the courts
So
can.
what might that look like? How do we show? And I also want to caveat, you work only with women. So we're talking about,
Yes,
but the tables could be churned. So for the dads that are listening, I understand that your female spouse may very well be the one with the addiction issues and the concern of safety. So when you say we're going to show something to the court, what might that be?
You've got to have evidence, right? So one of the things is, you need to share this immediately with your attorney if you're seeking a divorce. And often clients will come to us and they're like, well, what else is there? It's like, well, I do a divorce. And sometimes there are civil ways you can help someone get help. But, for us as divorce attorneys, if we're going the divorce route and that's the issue, we need to understand the facts. It's very fact specific. You must tell me all the things that have happened, because not everybody, in fact, a very small percentage, of alcoholics have DUIs, right? It's very rare we're going to have a whole nice court record to show. Right. So we're going to need instances. We're going to need your recollection. What is going on? What are those things? Why are you concerned? And so it's real important. Many times I've had conversations with women and they're like, well, I don't want to disparage him and I don't want to file all that. Well, then don't think that if we don't bring this up now, that this is something that is a negotiating tool. It's not. Mm-hmm. If it's happening and you have concerns, you better bring it now, because if you're going to not address it and just trust him, the court is not going to really believe you. Just to be harsh, right? Your credibility is at stake because you've been letting the child stay or your children stay with your husband while they've been intoxicated. And now in 6 months, you're going to say, wait a minute, because you don't like something. Now I want to bring it up. I very much disagree with that at all. If it is a problem, you bring it up now and you deal with it and you ask the court for a substance abuse evaluation. That is what we have available to us in this state. And you're going to have to explain to the court why. And also, what I have found to happen in some cases is maybe your husband isn't the only one with an issue. So you need to make sure you're ready to go through that as well. That can often happen. And I, it's so important your attorney asks you these hard questions that maybe make you uncomfortable, but that's the only way they can fully represent you is full disclosure. And that's why it's confidential. And I have told many people that, might be the one who's like, I've had a problem. And, I've told them, hey, if you are telling me you've had a problem and you're getting help, we can go to court all day long. But if you're going to lie to us and try to hide it to the court, that's not going to work.
That's right.
It tends to find up and, they find out and it can be dangerous. And then now you've dug yourself a real hole in a litigation as it regards to children. That's the only time the courts care. Right. If you don't have children and you're like, he's a drunk, he's an adult, right? The judge isn't going to do anything except, if he keeps losing his job and that affects, spousal support, but that's like just a whole nother, issue because again, we're talking as it relates to kids. And so understand what your remedies may be in court and then you have to go after them. If you say, well, he says he's going to get help. Well, that's what most addicts say. And then they don't, or they're, trying to manipulate themselves out of that situation. And I have found, throughout the years, you bring it to the court's attention. And if those evaluations and everything show them to have a problem, the courts will order help. They may make the visitation supervised. They may make them use SoberLink, which is like a breathalyzer on an iPad before their interaction and before their visitation with your child. So there are a lot of safeguards. There's a lot of options. And I find the courts move swiftly on those kinds of issues because it presents a safety issue for children. Much swifter than they are on a financial issue. They don't consider that an emergency. But these types of issues, they do. And so it's one where if it's an issue, you should really address it with your attorney. And, if you two have done, partied together, be ready to be the subject of that. And many times addicts say that anyway, right? Oh, no, you're the one with the problem. Okay, just be ready to be like, I'll go do whatever you want, whatever drug tests, whatever alcohol evaluations that are necessary.
What would a substance abuse evaluation look like? Let's say that you can get the court to agree that you've given a case and that this is what you want. What are the steps?
So usually they appoint a psychologist. That we have psychologists who do them. And, a lot of it is the questions. We've got, a lot of times they'll do hair follicle and nails for alcohol. And it can show binge drinking. Because alcohol, doesn't really stay in your system that long. So a urine test is only going to show so much, obviously more than drugs. But they'll do a lot of testing and psychological testing and things, and they will come up with a report. And in my experience, they're usually identify when there's a problem. And I've got to say, those are severe, right? People have, real issues, but it exists and it's important because you are worried about your child. So, or, you don't really even, you might not have to do that if, say, he just got arrested for a DUI. And then, like I said, not always do you have that kind of proof. And it might sound like cynical or hardcore on my part, but I'm all about evidence for the court. And so if you do have that, it's like, well, if this is what you're thinking, this is the time to go pursue it and really have the evidence that you need.
And to remind you listeners that there are safeguards. There are, as you were saying, Heather, supervised visitation, SoberLink, ways in which children can still have relationships with their parents who might be facing the disease of addiction and working through that, hopefully, and keeping them safe, because it can be a real fear when they're no longer under your roof. And there is a certain amount of parental surrender that happens. as we get divorced. So thank you for highlighting that. Heather, I want to talk to you for another week, but we are going to wrap today's episode. And as we do so, can you remind us, first of all, the books that you have on the shelf that folks can find as a resource? Give us that list.
Yes, so the Women's Guide to Divorce in Florida, we have that. We have the Women's Guide to Whether or Not You Want to Get Divorced, and then the Women's Guide to Becoming an Entrepreneur. And those are they're very short, very readable books that are available on Amazon, and we probably have a link on our website somewhere. And then we have a new book that will be published in 2025 that will be much more substantive. So we'll keep you updated on that. If you go to our website and want to, know what we have going on, you can sign up for our newsletters, and then you'll get links to blogs and videos that, we're hoping, we're just producing a lot of good content to give you good information to make your decisions as you move forward.
Yes. And that website is
www.floridawomensLawGroup.com.
And you also have a podcast that you produce regularly, which I was fortunate enough to be a recent guest on. So tell us where that can be found as an additional resource in the title.
Yes. So the name of our podcast is Women Winning Divorce, and it is available on all the streaming sites for podcasts, as well as womenwinningdivorce.com. And we are almost ending our second year, and the title comes from my belief that you can win at divorce if you achieve your goals and objectives. And it's not about making someone else lose. Really, it's more about identifying how you can have a win. And we all, if we want to look at life that is happening for us and not to us, we can have a lot of wins every day, and they don't have to be major, but the little ones really can help us sustain and be more positive.
Oh, Heather, such great words of wisdom. Thank you so much for joining today on the Good Divorce Show. And listeners, as your good divorce coach, Karen McNenny, I will remind you, as I do every week, everything will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end.
Thanks for listening. Do you have questions or thoughts about this week's episode? Let us know by following the Good Divorce Coach on Facebook and Instagram @GoodDivorceCoach, and leave a comment. And be sure to tune in every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific, or listen anytime wherever you get your podcasts.